Seems like there's a bit of a typo issue there.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm gonna steal some shit. Not enough axe wheeler love.
World of Fire Emblem like backwards.
Yeah. I can't hit anything.
So we're saying it's a stormtrooper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in Echoes. If anybody's played Echoes, the archers suck. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're not going to go through that whole thing. What's up, guys? Welcome to Fire Emblem History of the Emblem. So, this is going to be an overview of the entire franchise from beginning to end. So, for who here has never played a Fire Emblem game before? Raise your hand. Okay. So, who here got started with a classic Fire Emblem game, so pre-Awakening? Okay. And who got started here with a modern Fire Emblem game post-Awakening? Okay, so I want to address the elephant in the room first of all. That there seems to be a bit of disparity with the fandom between modern and classic. I love both. My first game that I ever played was Awakening, but my favorite games in the series are Blazing Sword and Radiant Dawn. So I love every game in the series, and hopefully I can spread that passion to you guys. And so we're going to start off with a little bit of introduction here. So my name is Clinton Bradley. I've been doing panels at conventions since 2013. This is my first Fire Emblem panel and my first panel at Anime Blast Chattanooga. And I now am, I guess, the self-appointed manager of a little Fire Emblem cosplay group on Facebook where we're trying to get everybody we're trying to have a nice, concise group where everybody can just kind of talk about cosplay and not focus so much on, like, memes and controversy and things like that, which seems to plague a lot of other Fire Emblem groups. Huh? Yeah.
We're doing pretty good so far.
And the Fire Emblem character that I cosplay is Har from Radiant Dawn. Of course, I did not bring that cosplay with me today because I actually just drove up here from Atlanta. So I made it here like right before the panel was about to start. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Cheyenne Lopez. My first Fire Emblem game was actually Radiant Dawn. I ran into it when I was younger and fell instantly in love with it. This is my first panel ever. I'm normally an artist alley, so you probably have seen my very tired dog hanging out on the table.
Yeah. So the dog is actually underneath the table right now. It's a corgi. So if you guys love corgis, there's one in the room right now. So make sure you guys stop by the Dealer's Room Artist Alley and visit her table while you're here this weekend as well.
So I do love the newer ones also. I'm just very passionate about certain aspects of the newer ones. We're getting to the children because I have some very serious gripes about the children.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, so what questions do we have before we begin? All right, awesome. So, that'll be a recurring theme. So, the Fire Emblem series unfortunately had a habit of being kind of late to the game for every respective console that it came out for. So the first Fire Emblem game did not come out for the Famicom until 1990. And this is, can you guys see that on the screen there? Okay, so this is the original Fire Emblem game. This is Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and Warriors of Light. And this was released on the Famicom in 1990. So the idea behind Fire Emblem was to take the very successful Famicom Wars series that was out in Japan at the time, which was a strategy-based game, and combine it with, okay, so we have this awesome Famicom Wars series, right? So, but this other series called Dragon Quest is doing really, really well. And then Square just knocked it out of the park with a little game called Final Fantasy. So how can we take Famicom Wars and make it into one of these RPGs? And that's what we got with Fire Emblem. So everybody should understand the basic mechanics of the game. It's a grid-based, turn-based strategy RPG where you move your units around. You have various different classes that they occupy. So it's like, what if we were to take those classes you had in Famicom Wars and give them a personality and a backstory? Oh! So that was kind of what they were going for with that. So this is when the famous hero of light, Marth, was introduced to all of us, and he doesn't wear pants. And he will not wear pants until a couple of entries later.
Link didn't start off with pants either, to be fair.
Yeah, so there was a lot of the fundamental game design decisions from the franchise were first implemented in this original game, such as permanent death. So when you lost a character, you lost that character. They died forever, and there was only one way to get them back. There was an item in the game that you could get towards like the last couple of chapters. You could revive one character with it. That never appeared in another Fire Emblem game after that, though. They took it out. So yeah, the game was known for its challenge for that reason, but you usually got plenty of characters to replace ones that died and things like that. So let's move on. I think we should have... Okay. So in 1992, we got the second Fire Emblem game, which is right here on the counter. This is Fire Emblem Gaiden. So at this point, Gaiden, let's see, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are already on their 5th entry by the time this game came out. So it was a little bit, again, late to the game to be released on the Famicom after the Super Famicom had already come out. But Fire Emblem Gaiden had a ton of really great ideas that really kind of failed in execution. So Gaiden is considered the black sheep of the series, similar to how maybe Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link or Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest are considered the black sheep of their series. Fire Emblem had that same situation. So Gaiden was considered to be not inferior to the original in a couple of ways, but it introduced a lot more RPG-heavy mechanics. So, can everybody hear me okay, first of all? Okay. So, it had a lot more RPG mechanics. So it had random battles. It had dungeons. You didn't have to worry about your weapons breaking in this game. And you had 2 branching paths with the 2 main characters, Alm and Celica. Does that sound familiar to some people who might be newer to the series? Okay, so you see what I'm getting at already. But yeah, the game was not received all that well, even though, like I said, it had fantastic ideas, but maybe didn't execute them so well because it didn't really have the technology to do that. But luckily, it was given a remake, which we'll be addressing later. What questions do we have before we move on? Okay, so the next game we had, finally we made the transition to the Super Nintendo in 1994. So this is Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, which I happen to have right here. So now you realize that the title of this panel is a pun, and you're probably face-palming at that. But, so, Mystery of the Emblem. Mystery of the Emblem is actually a semi-remake of the original game, and it's also a sequel. So what they did is it has 2 separate, it has Book 1 and Book 2, kind of like how Ys does, if you guys are fans of the Ys series. Book 1 is a straight remake of Shadow Dragon, with a couple characters taken out. And then Book 2 is a new story that continues the adventures of Marth. And he finally decided to wear pants this time. So, all right. So, pop quiz. What game was the first game to feature the weapon triangle? Show of hands. Who wants to guess?
She's guessing.
And she probably is guessing right. So the first game to feature the weapon triangle was Genealogy of the Holy War. This is Fire Emblem 4, essentially. So, Genealogy of the Holy War was the first game to feature the weapon triangle and the first game to feature where you could marry your characters and have children, which would become a staple later on in the series. But it's funny how we would introduce that in the fourth game and not revisit it until much, much later. So, Genealogy of the Holy War is widely considered to be one of the best games in the series for a couple reasons. Genealogy of the Holy War has a very dark, complex story. So you guys remember the controversy around Fates' localization? Yeah, Genealogy would never have been localized in America with the story that it had. The story includes things like incest and having your children married off to some other family, like arranged marriages. There's a lot of controversial topics in Genealogy's story, and I'm not going to spoil one of the big plot points. But this was the first game to feature the generational skip. So you start out as a brand new lord. You start out as Sigurd, and you go through his quest. And then through a series of technicalities, we have a time skip where you play as his son and the descendants of all of the characters that you played as with Sigurd. So you build a new party from the children, and you don't get any of the characters you had before for reasons. So Genealogy of the Holy War also featured very large-scale, full-on war-size battles, where you would have to, and the enemies were smart too. The enemy would just build a formation in front of you and be like, "Come at me, bro," and you'd have to find a way to get through that. So it was challenging, and it was it was a much more large-scale game than the Fire Emblem games that even we're used to now. No other game before or since had battles on the scope that Genealogy has. What else? Oh, the music is also fantastic. If you ever get the opportunity, please listen to the soundtrack for Genealogy. So, what questions do we have about that before we move on? All right. Okay. So, keep in mind, none of these games were ever released in America. These were all Japan only. So in 1996, Genealogy came out in 1996. We would not get another Fire Emblem game until 1999. So you're probably thinking, oh, it should have been on the Nintendo 64, right? No. We had Fire Emblem Thracia 776 on the Super Famicom. So again, it's here we are almost at the GameCube era and we're still releasing a Super Famicom game. So as a result, Thracia did not sell very well. I think it sold just over 200,000 copies, which is it's the lowest selling game in the entire series. But it's still beloved by a lot of fans. And it pioneered some very critical game mechanics that we know to this day. So it pioneered the alternate win conditions. So you know how in some Fire Emblem maps you'll have to rout all the enemies, or you'll have to seize the castle or whatever. Those were the only two win conditions in the game up until Thracia. Thracia introduced the escape or the defend game types. So all those lovely defend missions where you have to sit there and turtle up for turn after turn after turn were brought to you by this game free of charge. And Thracia does take place in the same continuity as Genealogy. It's essentially, but it's not a sequel. It takes place between the two separate. It takes place before the time skip of Genealogy. All right. Does this character look familiar to anyone? All right. So apparently there were a lot of complications with Fire Emblem 64, and so therefore it was never finished. But assets of Fire Emblem 64 were recycled and put into this next game we're going to be talking about. The main director of the Fire Emblem series, Shozo Kaga, left the company after Thracia and founded his own company, and he actually made another game that is just like Fire Emblem. He made a game called Tear-Ring Saga. Has anybody heard of that?
Yeah, in America it's like Emblem Saga?
It was going to be called Emblem Saga, but there was very obvious copyright debacle over that.
Yeah.
So there was 2 Tearing Saga games, and they look gorgeous. They are on the PlayStation 1, and they use like that Castlevania Symphony of the Night style sprites. They look really cool. So if you guys ever are curious about like what's another classic Fire Emblem game that I can play that's not any of these we've just talked about, look up Tearing Saga, because it's essentially a Fire Emblem game that is not called Fire Emblem. Also, okay, so moving on to 2002, we got Fire Emblem the Binding Blade, or Sword of Seals, whatever you want to call it. And this game was released for the Game Boy Advance. And supposedly features recycled assets from Fire Emblem 64. But we can't confirm that because the game is never finished. So immediately you'll notice with Fire Emblem Binding Blade that it's significantly scaled down in terms of the size of the encounters than what we got with Genealogy and Thracia. So it very much feels like a portable, watered-down version of those games. And so, again, didn't really have the greatest reception, and the story was criticized for being very similar to the original game. You have a lot of characters that hit all those key points, like from Shadow Dragon, that are just like the same recycled tropes. It's like Roy is essentially Marth, and this other character is essentially, his sidekicks, and like even the other character that's next to him there looks a little bit like Sheeta. So, but the Binding Blade was the first game to feature a tutorial. So, you know how at the beginning of Blazing Sword, or even Awakening Your Fates, you have a nice little tutorial to tell you how to move around and everything? We didn't have that until the 6th game in the series. So they were pretty hardcore in Japan in the early 90s. They really wanted you to just figure it out through trial and error, So, let's see. So then finally, in 2003, we got a prequel to Binding Blade, which is Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Who's here has played Blazing Sword? Show of hands. All right. This is one of my favorite games in the series. So you may notice in this picture there's English text. That is not a mistake. This game was released in English. This is the first Fire Emblem game to finally be released in America. And so it lost the subtitle. It was just called Fire Emblem to not confuse anyone, I guess. A little bit of trivia about that. So I mentioned that Binding Blade was released in 2002. Super Smash Bros. Melee was released in 2001. So Roy was actually introduced in Super Smash Bros. Melee before Binding Blade was even released. So he was put in there to promote the game, because supposedly we were going to get Marth and Sigurd, who would have been the most relevant lords to the series up until that point. But they dropped Sigurd in favor of Roy to promote the Binding Blade. So people in America were like, who is this red-haired guy that's so awesome? I want to play as him in another game. And we never got that game. So you'll not be able to play as Roy in a localized game. Instead, in Blazing Sword, you'll play as Roy's father, Eliwood. Blazing Sword has actually 3 main lord characters, whom you can see on screen: Eliwood, Lyn, and Hector. And all of them are awesome. It is such a great cast of characters. You actually have the option to pick a different story route depending on whose path you want to follow. So all the chapters are essentially the same up until a point, and then you pick Eliwood, Lyn, or Hector to continue the story, and you have optional chapters that appear off the beaten path for those characters. So you may get, I think Hector's is the longest, if I'm not mistaken, at I think it's 32 chapters or something like that. It's a long game, but it's absolutely one of my favorites. To me, it has one of the most easy to understand but concise and well-constructed plots out of the series, where you had strong villains, you had game mechanics that are pretty easy to understand, and I believe they actually they didn't have a difficulty setting in this game, and if I understand correctly, they actually toned down the difficulty for the American release, so it's on easy mode by default in the English release. Any questions or comments before we move on? This is an open panel discussion, so if you have something you'd like to add, just feel free to throw it out there. Okay. Before I forget, the Blazing Sword was the first game to feature the Tactician, which we all know and love from Awakening. So, in in Awakening you create your avatar character, and that is the Tactician. So in Blazing Sword, you are the Tactician. So it breaks the fourth wall a little bit, and you have characters that actually look directly at you and say, "What should we do next, Tactician?" And you're like, "Well, I don't know, kill that thing." And the idea is that it's actually a really brilliant idea because it really makes it seem like you are commanding an army. And what you're seeing on screen has nothing to do with your inputs, it has to do with your direction. The feats that those characters achieve are the feats that those characters achieve, not what you... it has nothing to do with your inputs, you're just giving them direction. So in let's say an action game like Devil May Cry or something like that, you feel powerful because you're playing as Dante. In a game like Fire Emblem, you feel like you are just a general commanding units around, and their success, their lives are dependent on your direction and your leadership. So who here has played Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones? Show of hands. A couple people, not as many as Blazing Sword. So Sacred Stones, again, is considered to be one of the best games in the series by some fans. Interestingly enough, this game was actually announced for release after Path of Radiance was. So they wanted to make the jump back to 3D and back to consoles with Path of Radiance, but after they had announced that, oh, by the way, Sacred Stones, coming out soon. So we had Sacred Stones and Path of Radiance a mere year apart from or less than a year apart from each other. Which may or may not have hurt sales, but if you had a Game Boy Advance in the early 2000s, what a time to be a Fire Emblem fan, right? Get that second game back to back, and then it moves on to GameCube era. So Sacred Stones, I have personally not finished this game, but I like what I've played of it. It's the first game since the original Gaiden to actually go back and explore those RPG mechanics again. So Sacred Stones has the map where you can move your character, just like Awakening, where you can direct your characters where you want them to go. It has the two branching paths with our two main lords, Ephraim and Erica. They do eventually meet up much sooner than they do in Gaiden. And you have random battles, you have dungeons, you have other non-human enemies that you fight, like giant fucking spiders that are terrifying. And this game has very dialogue heavy compared to Blazing Sword. And to me, I feel like that's almost kind of to its detriment, because I feel like, at least from what I played, I haven't finished it yet, that Sacred Stones, its plot is not as concise or easy to understand as Blazing Sword. And but it has a lot of dialogue. Every scene, every new chapter, there are always a lot of conversations back and forth. So you have a lot of really well fleshed out characters, and the world is very well fleshed out. So, solid game, highly recommend it. Any questions or comments before we move on? Okay. All right. Now it's getting really, really legit. So, who here has played Fire Emblem Path of Radiance? 3 people? That is a shame. Yes.
It's very hard to find now.
It is.
And so that's what I was so upset that I had like I said, my first Fire Emblem, and I had a very close friend steal it from me, and I haven't seen it since. And
That sucks.
by the time I did find it again, I'm looking a couple $100s, and I'm like, love
Yeah,
it.
this an English copy of this game retails for about, or not, doesn't retail because it's secondhand, but it costs about $120. So unfortunately, it's not very accessible. But anyone that's played and I don't condone this, but anybody that's played these games, let's face it, you probably didn't play these cartridge ones. You probably played them on an emulator or something like that. So that's probably how you'll play. That's probably how you'll play Path of Radiance, you filthy pirates.
Until the GameCube Mini comes out.
Yeah, eventually.
But nobody will get a GameCube Mini because they'll only release like 35. So
Yeah.
Well, that's
Thanks,
fine. I'll wait
Nintendo.
in line to be first.
Yep, there you go. So, Path of Radiance was the start of my favorite, I guess, continuity in the series, the Tellius region. Path of Radiance I don't like so much as its sequel, but I still really do love it. So we have a brand new Lord again. We have Ike. Who's played as Ike in Super Smash Bros? Like everybody's played as Ike in Super Smash Bros, right? So, great cast of characters. Again, I can't recommend Path of Radiance enough. The only thing is, because we've gone to 3D animations, I would highly recommend turning the battle animations off, because as nice as they are to look at, it just eats up so much time every chapter with watching those battle animations. So I turned the battle animations off to where you'll see your sprite that's on the map just do an attack swing, and that's it, and you see damage calculation. I would highly recommend that going into Path of Radiance. So, interestingly enough, Ike's character, he's not really a lord in your typical sense. He's not royalty necessarily. He's basically just a thug almost. Like he's part of a mercenary group, and his character arc that he has, where he leads the Grail mercenaries to greatness, is one of my favorite stories in the Fire Emblem series. But he's a much more down-to-earth and relatable character, and he's the underdog for the majority of Path of Radiance, and he's fighting against his odds. He sees, I'm not going to go into spoilers, but it'd be next panel I'll do that. Okay, so who here has played my favorite game in the series, Radiant Dawn? Okay, probably the same people that played Path of Radiance, right? So, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn was released as a Wii exclusive, I think in 2008?
Yeah,
Yep.
so in high school.
2007. So, Radiant is a Wii exclusive, which again makes it impossible to find. It's still up there in price, but not quite as much as Path of Radiance. It's about maybe $80, $90. Again, I couldn't recommend this game enough. So, my thing about, and this is where I start to become critical of the series. And I think it's good to be critical of the things you like. There are some game design decisions in the Fire Emblem series, love it or hate it, that are just not okay. For instance, random stat growth. Who thought random stat growth was a good idea? There are times in Blazing Sword, especially for me, where I will just hard reset the game and start over because I got a bad level up. That should not happen in an RPG like that, where you spend like 30, 40 hours playing the game or more. So Radiant Dawn does have an easy type mode. It's still pretty challenging, but just being able to like go through an early chapter and get decent level ups, I'm like, wow, I'm actually having fun. This game isn't beating me to the ground. But if I can love Radiant Dawn for one thing, is its story, because if you see the arc that all the characters have had, and the evolution of their designs have changed. Everybody is really like battle hardened. Ike is like super buff, and he looks like Guts from Berserk. Actually, he's got a big fuck off sword. His biceps are showing, and he's like,
He didn't go for leg day.
yeah. I got ripped in 30 days for fighting for my friends. And
He used the anchor arms.
yeah, he used anchor arms.
It's a SpongeBob meme for everything.
Yeah. So. But then even characters like Nefini, I think is her name, and who else? Soren, like all those characters, like to see how they've changed in Radiant Dawn is like, it's honestly kind of an emotional experience to be like, oh, look at, they're all grown up now. And the art is so much better. Because frankly, the portraits in Path of Radiance are just ugly. And I know this because, again, I cosplayed Har from Radiant Dawn, so I had to sit there and meticulously study reference pictures of his art in Radiant Dawn. And my girlfriend was helping me kind of analyze the reference pictures and draw things out for patterns. And she's like, will you look at this picture? Is this right? And I'm like, no, that's his Path of Radiance art. It's fucking ugly. Focus on this. This is the good
I think
stuff.
we had that issue in like the group chat too, like when we were talking about just the difference in the armor
yes.
styles.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, no.
Yeah, I love Path of Radiance to death, but the sprites are ugly compared to Radiant Dawn. Radiant Dawn has gorgeous, gorgeous art and a fantastic soundtrack as well. Only a couple of you have played it. Dawn Brigade, yay or nay? Okay, so a lot of people hate on the Dawn Brigade, and I don't know why.
I'm mixed.
Okay. So for those of you that never played the original Fire Emblem, how many of you have played Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon? Okay, so you played the original Fire Emblem game now. So,
PS remake is
Uh-huh.
that I have, yeah.
so Shadow Dragon is a straight remake of the original game. Came out in 2010 on the DS, and I'm not really the biggest fan of this game. And maybe it's because it's a straight remake of the original and it's using a lot of archaic game mechanics. But again, I think one of my biggest gripes with it is the art. Like, I think the portraits are ugly in this game too, and I don't really know why. But again, you get to see Marth wearing not only pants but armor, and
It's gradually getting more clothes.
yeah, it's a great rendition. Yeah, not the biggest fan of this game. It is definitely worth checking out if you wanted to know what the original game was like and you actually want to understand what you're doing. Quick call out. The original Fire Emblem games did not show you your damage calculation on screen before you attack. So you know when you're about to attack a unit and you're like, oh, I'll be able to kill this guy. I'll be able to double attack him and probably critical him too because I have all these abusive abilities. And in the original games, that was not the case. You had to sit there and compare stats and do the math yourself. And ain't nobody got time for that. So Shadow Dragon, for that reason, is a lot more accessible to play than the original. And it does have an English release. It's on the hard to find side. You're probably going to pay about $40 for this, give or take. But I would say it's definitely worth it if you're hardcore into Fire Emblem, but not one of my favorite games in the series. Any call-outs before we move on? Okay. All right. So, who here has... It does have fans. Who here has played Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem Heroes of Light and Shadow? Nobody? Okay. And the reason why is because it's obscenely hard to find, and it was never released in America. So again, after Shadow Dragon, we had another game that was not released in America, which probably... I know a lot of fans were very worried about that because of like, is this it? Are we not going to get any more English Fire Emblem? What's happening? So... New Mystery of the Emblem, Heroes of Light and Shadow, is a remake of Mystery of the Emblem. And that's about all I can tell you about it, because I don't own it. The only Fire Emblem games that I do not own is this game and Gracia. It is very hard to find. The DS, from what I understand, it is possible to play this region free if you do find a copy of it, but good luck understanding what you're doing. Pop quiz, what was the first game in the series to give you the option to play without permanent death? Go ahead.
No, it wasn't. Was it that one?
Correct. It is this. It is not Awakening. It is this game.
Yeah, it was one right before, and I'm pretty sure that was the one right before.
Awakening is not the first game to give you the option to play without permanent death. So if you do decide to pick up a Japanese copy of this and play it, at least you'll have the certainty of knowing that you will not have to hard reset because you lost a character you care about, if you're into that thing. All right, we're going to watch another video really quick. Annotations. All right. Who here's played Fire Emblem Awakening? Everybody, right? So, again, I have to address the elephant in the room. So this is a very controversial topic, especially if you talk about it online. But Awakening is probably the game that is solely responsible for saving the series. And there's a lot of controversy around that. A lot of people use sales figures to back that up, which can be interpreted as a valid and invalid argument. I've seen plenty of debates about it. Again, I love the classic games. I really do. But Awakening is my third favorite game in the series. So I love both the modern and the classic. So, and I guess to kind of unpack that, to really explain why this game created such a disparity between the fan base, is that the biggest feature this game implements to American audiences is the ability to play without permanent death, which to me is a great idea because if you're a hardcore player that likes the permanent death aspect, you can always play with it turned on, and the the lunatic mode is still just as challenging as ever. However, when you introduce somebody to the franchise with this game and they are conditioned to play with permanent death turned off, it makes the older games less accessible retroactively. So that is the reason why the classic fans don't necessarily care for these newer games, because it's alienated them as a fan base and made it to where they can't connect with these newer fans as much, because these newer fans don't want to touch the older games. So that's usually what the issue we run into. So again, I'm here to tell you that's all nonsense. Play the older games, play the newer games, whichever ones you like, and we'll be friends. So, because that's what this game is all about, right? It's making friends. So Awakening's story is very bare bones for an RPG that was released in 2013, but it is very solid overall. The game mechanics very solid. Great cast of characters. They revamped the art style into a new cel-shaded style, and those pre-rendered cinematics are absolutely gorgeous. This is the game that really put the 3DS on the map, and if you look at the games that were available for the 3DS at the time this game came out, not a whole lot, right? So this game really was like, if you had a 3DS, there wasn't all that much out at the time. My ex convinced me to buy this game on a whim, but when I first got my 3DS, and it was like I was hooked. So, any questions or call-outs about Awakening? I feel like we know enough about this. Go ahead.
I like how they didn't have feet in the 3D model art in Awakening.
Yes, that's an interesting call-out.
They had stubs.
They had stubs, yes.
If any of you booty danced your way into Crom's heart, we can't be friends. No, get out.
Oh, so no joke. One of my friends did that by accident, so she got Olivia and Crom married by accident, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm just."
Mia, no.
Yeah, she's like, "Oh, I've got Olivia and Crom married." And I'm like, "You got what?" So those of you that play the game know how hard that is to achieve. You have to basically keep all the women away from Crom. Like, no, you're not allowed, and just
stalk him around the map for that one battle.
Yeah, you have 2 chapters to make this work, and then he'll marry a random villager if you don't do it correctly. It's bullshit. So, yeah, my friend has EX rank block. My friend has. So, also, Frederick is the best nanny ever. We love Frederick. So I was always a huge fan of the pre-promoted characters because they usually had good story significance. I love Marcus in Blazing Sword. I love Seth in Sacred Stones. And Titania is... Love Titania. But Frederick is up there. He's great. Also, Awakening... Correct me if I'm wrong. Awakening is rumored to take place in the same continuity as the original game. No confirmation, but it's rumored to. And we have some evidence for that. We have a reoccurring character that appeared in both the original game and in Awakening. Which character is that? You there in the back with the orange hair.
Tiki, right?
Correct. Tiki. Get your amiibos now.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Okay. So, after Awakening got, 10 million copies sold worldwide or something like that. Very successful game, successful in America. The series really took off for us here in the West. So not sequel, but the next game in the series was slated to be released in America as well. So Fire Emblem If, as it was called in Japan, is now known as Fire Emblem Fates here in the U.S. So who here has played Fire Emblem Fates? Majority of us have, right? Conquest, Birthright, and Revelations. Okay, I've only played Conquest.
I got all three. I was one of the lucky ones that got the special edition that contained all three. So
You've played all three.
I had the 3-week early access to Revelations, which made it really hard to want to discuss as far as Revelations with everybody because nobody else that I knew had this copy, so I was stuck knowing what happened in Revelations and couldn't talk about it because I didn't want to spoil it, and I'm just like, oh my god, hurry up.
So, Fates is a very, very big departure in terms of aesthetic and visuals from the other games in the series. None of the characters you see on screen here look anything like what we've seen before, but my god, are they gorgeous. Like, great character design in this game.
Remember the initial reaction to the Hoshido, and people were not happy with the Japanese looking aesthetic. They're like, well, we're used to this European that we're getting with
The classic games.
freaking
Nor.
let me guilt trip you the whole time game.
Yeah.
So
We're gonna watch a little video. You guys are gonna like this. So this is Fire Emblem Fates in a nutshell. To backpedal a little bit and go back to Awakening, one of the things that attracted a lot of people to Awakening was the reoccurring mechanic from the beloved Genealogy of the Holy War to marry your characters and have children. There was adorable support conversations where the characters would fall in love, and the child character you would get as a result would be a playable character in the game. And they would adopt some of the physical characteristics and some of the abilities and classes of their parent, which was huge. Awakening, this mechanic could be exploited for gameplay reasons. There's actually formulas and algorithms to farm to farm essentially the most powerful character based on genetics. So,
see, I married Morgan to Tharja, and Robin to Tharja. Morgan was just unstoppable. I could just select her to be the only unit, and she would. I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Just go, my child.
So eugenics is a thing in the Fire Emblem universe. Breeding your children to be awesome.
I could say it worked better in Awakening, I felt, than in Fates,
Right.
because Fates is just like, let me just throw my kid into a portal here, and they'll be an adult in 2 weeks,
Right.
and I'm just like, no.
So the reason why I feel like it works better in Awakening is because
part
in
of the
Fates,
story.
it's the way the dialogue is written for the English localization. So the dialogue in Awakening feels like you're watching an elaborate stage play, a theater play. And that's the way the Fire Emblem series from day one has always been like you're watching an opera. It's always the tone of the story, it seems like. Fates is like watching somebody's high school play. The dialogue is very jokey, it's very silly, it's not easy to take seriously at all. But oh god, is the music good. As you can see, because I bought the soundtrack, the music is fantastic. If you guys ever get the chance to look up the soundtrack, listen to the track Road Taken, it's fantastic. But yeah, Fates has a lot of controversy. Gameplay-wise, I feel like it's actually really solid, because there are certain mechanics they introduce that I think should be staples of the series from now on. Like being able to pair units together and have them both attack was introduced in Awakening. Now your enemies can do it too. So you can have two enemies that pair up, and now all of a sudden you have to deal with stat buffs and blocking from your enemies as well, and that really adds a huge amount of strategy to the combat. And if they implemented some of the formations and the large-scale battles from Genealogy into a future game, you could really get some very, very, very impressive strategic battles. Also, having multiple Lord characters on each side is really interesting, because you have some powerhouse characters, a lot of pre-promotes in Fates right from the get-go. And either side has variances in abilities. So the Hoshido side, which is your Asian aesthetic, your samurai type characters, they're more quick and agile and have more evasive and double attacking abilities. And the Nor faction, who is your more European style, your knight type classes, have more tanks, more generals, and more mounted units. So you have your great knights and your paladins and your generals and things like that. So their dynamic is really interesting to see the way that those type of classes fight each other. Also, in who here thought that Conquest was more challenging than Birthright? Exactly. So Conquest is a difficult game. It's up there with. Can somebody please shut that door? Thank you so much.
In that room, how walls are made of.
Yeah, that'll help just a little bit, but they need to tone it down just a little bit. Anyway, so for me, one of the most challenging fights in Conquest was where I'm fighting other knight type characters that you see in Conquest. So like when they changed it up on you, and all of a sudden you're not fighting the samurai type characters anymore, you're fighting other knight type characters. It's like, what do I do now? My strategy is completely different. So it's quite challenging. But the Birthright was known to be incredibly easy because there's a lot of abusive abilities that those characters get, and it was just the maps themselves were not as challenging. So essentially, to move on quickly to the next game, Fates had a better story but worse gameplay. Conquest had better gameplay but a worse story. Go ahead.
I felt the story was weak all around. I think all three games greatly suffered from splitting it the way they did. I felt like the two main games we got weren't necessary, but Revelations in the end turned out to be so short because they wanted to do this split off. So I felt like all three chapters suffered as a whole, and it's like you don't even, the Fire Emblem doesn't even come in until Revelations, and you're like, what? And then you don't even know why Corrin's a dragon unless you buy the DLC after Revelations. So
I didn't even know about that.
Yeah,
that's some bullshit right there.
Yes, and then you don't know why the characters from Awakening, you're looking at these characters, you're like, oh, well, that looks like blah 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 from it is, and you don't get that answer unless you get the DLC again. So Revelation suffered from all the extended DLC that should have been included in Revelations, and then I feel like the other two games just suffered as a whole by trying to make three different stories.
Yeah, and it really isn't, and it's especially unfortunate because if you only play the one game, it feels lackluster, and if you play all three, it just feels disappointing.
Yeah, so
because you finally get the big picture, and it's not what you wanted.
So if you haven't played the DLC to find out why Corrin's a dragon and why those Awakening characters are in there, I mean, I guess you could get it. I would just rather watch it or just go on Wikipedia and get that information, because I always thought it was weird that I could marry my Hoshido family. Mm-hmm. What? and you don't get that answer until much later in the game. I'm like, okay, I can marry Takumi, and I don't know why. Mm-hmm. And then you get it, I think, at the end of Birthright or either in Revelations, and I'm just like, oh, well, that explains the incest. So, thanks, game.
So I have an entire video where I go on a rant about
I'm very passionate about
Conquest and its plot, but I'll keep it very, very short so we can move on to the next game. But I feel like the biggest thing that bothers me in Conquest is Corrin's ineptitude as a lord.
Oh my God.
Because any other RPG,
Who's the girl in the blue dress?
Oh yeah. I don't know, guys. I've never seen her before. Anyway, so Corrin is such an inept lord in Conquest. If you knew that you had an evil king, you had to go bum rush. Why would you, in a JRPG? Why would you not go bum rush the evil king
So
and just end it? And so he allows you to haul the mighty Norian army into Hoshido and trample each and every one of your beloved siblings, and you do absolutely nothing to stop him. And yet the game won't let you be evil.
And the whole time you just feel sorry for yourself, like, oh, in a different life I would have picked the Hoshido family, or oh, I know Daddy's mean, but I'm loyal,
and I feel like,
get over yourself, Corrin. Shut up.
Right, and I feel like if it was a non-canon alternate story, which it is, if you could have, because Conquest, all the different routes are alternate stories, the Revelations being the true ending.
Yes.
why not just let you be evil? I would rather you be having an evil
all
Corrin
out.
where you could just intently mercilessly kill your siblings and it'd be fun. But that hindered the game for me. So what questions or comments we have about Fates before we move on? Go ahead. You may want to come a little bit closer.
Just a quick question. Azura's Dance, Birthright version or Conquest version?
Oh, Conquest version.
Conquest is better.
Any day.
'Cause I'm more into more upbeat. Like if you ask me any version of any song, I'm probably gonna pick the more upbeat versions.
Yeah.
Just tell me who that girl is.
Yeah, we don't know. Never seen her before in my life. But she was impressive though. So again, Fire Emblem is now really popular in America. We had this big cosplay boom, and everybody loves it. So earlier this year, we had a Nintendo Direct that was specifically for Fire Emblem. We had a Fire Emblem Direct, and they announced a bunch of new IPs, 3 of which to come out within the same year. We had all 3 of these things. If you even count this one, we'll get there when we get to that. Who here has played Fire Emblem Echoes? Alright, Fire Emblem Echoes is great. It's fantastic. So Fire Emblem Echoes is a straight remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden. So if you remember at the beginning of the panel when I talked about Gaiden and I said how it had a lot of great ideas and maybe some sloppy execution, Echoes takes all those great ideas from Gaiden and finally gives it the technology to work correctly. So not only does it have, again, beautiful, beautiful art, but it accurately showcases those great features we had in Gaiden, such as the branching paths. And a lot of people who never played Gaiden but then go to play Echoes say, "Oh, this is not a Fire Emblem game. Where's my weapon triangle? Where's my breakable weapons? Why can an archer attack one space away from a melee unit? What's going on here?" But those are some of the gameplay mechanics that originated in Gaiden. And but one of the things that was not implemented in Echoes, it was in Gaiden from the start, was being able to class change. And being able to class change all the way back in 1992 was huge. Being able to change classes and things like that was a really revolutionary gameplay mechanic. It's a shame the Langrisser series thought of it first. So